Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in science fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard, author of The Bourbon Books, a series of contemporary romance and also works of speculative fiction. And I'm so excited to be joined again today by one of my favorite romance authors, Chandra Blumberg. Thank you, Chandra, for joining us. I'm going to just hold up your little book. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself while I stay behind the sharks here?
Okay, so yeah, I'm Chandra Blumberg and I write contemporary romance. My latest release is Second Tides the Charm, which is a reunion romance, a second chance romance between marine biologists who team up on a summer shark study. But they're not necessarily happy about it because they used to date. So we've got exes. Yeah, I love that shark that you got. Exes.
I have so many props, it's not funny.
Oh, which is perfect. Yeah, forced proximity on a boat all summer. So we got summer romance, beach read, super fun research-based shark study. So yeah, that's my book. I am a Chicagoland author, and I have 4 kids, so that I fit my writing time in between them. But I love to write fun, heartfelt romance.
Well, I love it. And this is the third time that you and I've gotten to talk about your book. So I can see behind you, you've got Digging Up Love, which is dinosaurs in the backyard, and bakery. So like you're speaking my love languages here. Stirring Up Love, where you brought up like the barbecue and also enemies to lovers. And now you've got Second Tides the Charm. And you brought out the full-on marine biology nerd in me. And I mean, this is my daughter's. This is not actually mine, but we have pretty much an entire SeaWorld aquarium made of stuffies in our house. So I'll put them down now because otherwise we'll start petting them during the show. But are you one of those Shark Week people who the whole world shuts down so you can eat gummy sharks? Or where did the idea for we have to not just make these marine biologists, but they're sharks?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I still do. I love all sorts of sea creatures, even though I grew up nowhere near any big body of water. But yes, I am a Shark Week girly. Like I grew up watching Shark Week every year and sort of forced my family members into watching it as a kid. You know, we'd have cousins visiting for the summer and I'd like rope them into it. And they're like, we don't understand it. I'm like, they're fascinating. Which never like, the shows that focus on shark attacks or, things like that. But the ones where you're actually learning about the animals and because the attacks and things are so rare. So I didn't like shows that sort of vilified sharks and focus on that. But, there's so many awesome things to learn. And now we have Shark Fest too on Nat Geo. So there's so much shark content that to consume. And yeah, I am that person who is all about that really year round.
I love that. You're like, I'm not going to limit my love to just 1 week, but I love that because I love that the main character in this, so Hope, and it is dual POV, so you get Hope and Adrian. But Hope, like she starts off, she's definitely that girl who wants to just correct the misconceptions about sharks, including where sharks are. So I laugh so hard at that opening scene you have where like a mom is mad because she was arguing with a kid about where sharks exist. And there are 8-year-olds out there who are arguing. I know because it's my 8-year-old who's like, are they over here? Like he'd probably ask if they're in our swimming pool and we don't have a swimming pool. And then he'd ask why we don't have a swimming pool. So that's how arguments go with him. They don't really stay on track, but you know how it is with kids where when they get an idea in their head, it's like, how do I get you back to reality? Sharks are not in that lake.
But part of that came from, so I didn't grow up on Lake Michigan, but I grew up vacationing near there because, if you live in Michigan like I did growing up, you go to the Great Lakes, either, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Superior. And so there's like always these shirts at tourist shops that talk about how like Lake Michigan is unsalted or like shark free. And so I loved having a little play on that. Because in the book, her best friend owns like a paddleboarding, kayaking shop. And that's where Hope is working at the beginning of the book. She's not working in Shark Week. She's in sharks, the field of shark research. She's out of her element. She is on the Great Lakes, which is where she grew up, but it's not where she wants to be. So she's sort of the fish out of water when the book opens.
You're already starting with the nautical puns, which I appreciate because that's one of the running jokes through it. And I forget, my husband even told me recently something about how so much of the stuff that we say just as regular terminology was originally nautical or ship. He's like, a logbook, that's also because it's an actual log. I'm like, I thought it was what they're writing. I'm like, no, it's a log. I'm like, you learn something new every day. But I guess that's what they were doing to measure something as far as the speed of the boat by how much the log was bouncing around. I thought there had to be a better way for it, but I guess in olden days you just use a log and hope for the best. But there were no logs involved in this, just lots of forced proximity, lots of physical humor, and you write it so well because I, for one, I'm one of those people who I'm very, very verbal. I talk too fast, as you can tell. And I'm all about like the banter, but the physical humor is very hard for me to write. You have this just down. I mean, every time I turn around, somebody's doing something and someone's falling or doing. And obviously, when you've got a whole body of water to fall into, it's kind of like, well, it's there. We're going to have to use it. But I love the physicality you bring to that. Is there something that you do in terms of like, do you act these out? Can I watch you try to act out these scenes? Like, okay, so if Hope gets knocked this way and then this happens, do you make your kids parent like pantomime?
No, so I feel like the one thing I do is I make the faces, which you probably do. I don't know. I feel like a lot of us do when we're writing. So I don't notice it unless I'm in public. And then I realize probably for the past, 10 minutes, I have been like scowling or whatever.
You're like, what is wrong with that woman? Why is she so mad at her laptop? And she's like, no, I'm just in character. Okay.
Yeah, but the physical things, I would say, first I just like to get it down. I get it. And then as I go through on multiple passes, I'll work out those. And sometimes I'm like, oh, would this, work? Like, would this physically work? But I think also just a lifetime of clumsiness has led me.
It's useful for something. You're like, one of the ways I've fallen, been knocked into, tripped over, the really dumb thing, and I will share this publicly, and I don't know why, that I keep doing lately is it's still very hot. I'm in SoCal, and it's not too bad right now. It's in our false fall for the past 3 days, but I've been wearing like little sleep shorties around the house, and they're very short. They're not indecent, but I keep getting caught on things like my kids' bed knobs. Like I'll go past it and I'm stuck on my shorts. And I'm like, once again, I'm falling over my own pants. Like, how stupid is this? So I'm eventually going to have to write something where someone gets caught on something because of their shorties, because I've lived it so many times now. It's now like trauma that I'm going to have to process.
Yes. And I'm sure readers can relate. There's going to be someone out there who's like, yes, it's not just me.
Yes. I've gotten belt loops stuck on kitchen cabinet hooks. I'm like, how did that happen? Like, what's going on here? I've always realized I get shirt holes right where I'm leaning because they rub. And I'm going, why is this even a thing? And how hard am I leaning against the table when I'm doing stuff? But I must have a lot of unresolved tension that I do. But you also write like the verbal banter is so fun between these characters, and not just between your leads, Hope and Adrian, but you've got these side characters who are part of the crew. And how did you decide you were going to just make these guys, that's it, you're going on a boat and I'm going to make you physically stuck on a boat? Because there's literally nothing worse than being stuck on a boat with somebody you don't want to be on a boat with.
So with the verbal banter, it's like, it's my favorite thing. Like you said, not just between the love interests, but I love to do, the best friends, the siblings. I have sort of a lot of fun with that because there's so many, I feel like if people have a history, there's so much you can pull from there. So many, inside jokes or gripes that they've had over the years. So that was really fun. And then, getting stuck on the boat. So I had the privilege of talking to a real life shark scientist.
I saw that your note.
Yeah, which was awesome. I was so grateful that she was able to take the time. But that's one of the things I wanted to ask about, like, what are you doing sort of on the boat all day? Because that's one of the things, when you're looking, I did, a lot of watching, like, obviously documentaries, but also like vlogs and things like that, as well as digging into like scientific research. But that's not something you always see, is like, what are you doing in the downtime?
Right.
So yeah, there is a lot of downtime, because part of it is like fishing, you're waiting. Maybe
will we catch a shark?
To study. And maybe, you're just going to be sitting out there on the boat. So I really wanted to put that into the book, that downtime of sort of sitting around on the boat and, what's going on, what they're chatting about, what's not coming up, especially between Hope and Adrian, who have this history, and like all the things that were left unsaid was a big part of the book.
Well, and I love that because first off, I was once, I wouldn't say stuck on a boat, but I went to a wedding reception that was on one of those harbor cruises. And it was at one of the worst times in my life. And I was really only going, like, it was the first wedding I went to after I had gotten divorced from my ex-husband. I did not want any part in weddings, but this was like a family friend and somebody who's almost as close to me as like a brother. Somebody's wedding you can't miss, but being stuck on a boat and not be able to just be like, okay, it's over, I'm going to have a glass of champagne and peace. And no, I am stuck on that boat waiting. And I remember as we were finally going back, me looking at my phone, like waiting for reception so I could just talk to anybody other than my parents who were like, looking at me like, is she gonna cry? I'm like, I'm not gonna cry, but I really hate this.
Yeah,
but it was awful. So I'm just like, I cannot imagine being stuck on a boat with someone that you've got this history with that you don't want to talk about, but then you look at them and you still have feelings for them, and it's just like, wow, you devised the perfect torture method for these characters who are like,
I do love the forced proximity trope. I feel like it finds its way into all of my books, whether I meant it to or not. Because there's just so much, there's just so much great things can come about when you sort of can't escape that person.
Yep.
They're sort of forced to confront these things. Like they've had 3 years apart where they haven't had to confront all of these things that drove them apart. And, they've been able to because they've had their separate lives, they had their separate spaces, but now there's no getting away from it. You sort of have to resolve these issues or it's going to just be a sort of terrible summer. So I really like that as a device.
Well, I loved it. And I love the fact that you started with a breakup that wasn't even like a breakup so much as it was just like a fade, a slow fade. And then next thing you know, it's like they're not together anymore. But it wasn't like there was a knockdown, drag out fight. There wasn't like there was infidelity. There wasn't something other than the two of them just not knowing if they fit in each other's lives right. And then everything had basically started with her best friend's husband passing away and her almost using that as that getaway. Like, well, I got to go help her. And no one can blame her because I think all of us would be like, yeah, if your best friend's spouse dies and they've got 3 small kids, you want to be there for them. But how much of that was, I want to be there for them, but I also want this as the excuse so that I don't have to deal with any of that.
Yeah, and especially in that field, I feel like there's so many things with academia in general, people's fields of study and where they're going to go, the long distance. They had been doing it for so long. And so they had sort of gotten to this point where they had been long distance. And now what are they going to do? They sort of had to reach a decision. And I think Hope in particular didn't like that idea of like having to have something, laid out. And so this is sort of her out, like you said. And then Adrian, they both sort of have these unresolved feelings, he's not really willing to let her go. This is sort of an out for both of them where they don't feel like they had to sort of lose that love, even though they did. It was, there was nothing between them. But they didn't have to, neither of them had to feel responsible or to sort of feel like, they had actually cut it off. So I think that that's what happens during the book is that they, like I said, they have to confront these things. They have to say things out loud. They can't just let it slide, right?
You have to use words.
Yes, which is, it's a big thing. I feel like people talk about miscommunication in books all the time, whether they love it or hate it. But I do think it's a factor in all relationships, whether they're, romantic or just familiar. It can be really hard to say what you need or even to get to that place where you know what you need. I think that, that's part of it is that they had to figure out what they needed from themselves, from each other, from the relationship. And then that's when they could sort of articulate it.
Yeah. And I love that you used, I wouldn't even say it was miscommunication so much as it was no communication. Like these people weren't talking to each other. Because I know for me, any of my close friends know that like the miscommunication trope is one of my least favorites, especially because so often it's a miscommunication that so obviously could have been interpreted in a different way. I remember reading one where it was like they're on the phone with somebody and say, I love you. And it's a daughter. And it's like, there's another woman. Or I saw her giving somebody a hug. It's her cousin. It's that kind of thing. And then 20 years go by and they don't speak to each other because of something like that. But here it was so understandable where this slow drift, where they end up, I'm holding on to my thing because the cats are running by like a small earthquake right now. They're there. Okay. But yeah, it's a slow drift rather than one of them misunderstands. Like they both understand where they're coming from, and they're seeing how maybe we don't belong together as much as we love each other, as much as we desire each other. Maybe this just isn't going to work out. And that's even more heartbreaking, where you're like, well, maybe love isn't all we need. And so I love how they had to start working through, and especially how you handled it with Hope, where she like goes through these, instead of like stages of grief, she goes through like stages of, how am I going to deal with it? Like, no Adrian. Okay. Some Adrian. All right. Okay. Friendship with Adrian, is any of this gonna work? And the more she does, and how comfortable they can be, and especially like the other big factor of this is they're not just on a boat, they're on a YouTube channel. They are like, Adrian had inadvertently come to fame helping with a shark, and next thing you know, he's got this huge following as their shark science crew, and they're trying to do those same things we were talking about earlier, about not have misinformation about what sharks are and what they're like. And Hope has no clue that this even happens, because she's been social media blackout. And so when she comes, it's not just, hey, you're dealing with him, but you're dealing with this, Gabe on his camera the whole time. Is that how you feel about social media? And I'm sorry for dragging you on this show.
So no, it's not. I feel like as an author, and I'm sure you feel the same way, like it's part of the gig now. I'm sure there are some authors that don't have to, they've attained the status where
they're like, the books will do their thing without me.
Yeah. But to some extent, I feel like most authors are present on social media to a big or small extent. So I felt like that was something that I was a little more familiar with, coming from that, not at all on the level of Adrian, who has like over 1 million followers. But sort of, I think for Hope, it's like this. It's now she, not only does she have to get back into shark research after several years away, but she has to do it with her ex around, and she has to do it on camera. So it's like this triple threat of things that she has to deal with. And the camera is not her friend. She's one of those people where, yeah, like me, social media, I enjoy it for interacting with people. I love chatting with people. But in terms of sharing my daily life, I'm like, oh, it's kind of tricky, to navigate that space, which was Hope. She was like all private on her socials, and she goes from, not even having social media to now she is involved in their social media because it's part of the job. And so that becomes a big factor. And it's also something that I think is very relevant. Influencers are here, and like, it's just part of our lives right now. And I think it was sort of tricky in writing contemporary romance. You're always like, sort of, how of the moment should it be? So you never want to box yourself in too much, but at the same time, I think it is important to sort of reflect the world as it is now. And right now, social media influences, all that is a part of our life, for good and bad. And I think one of the great things about it is the science education. Like, I follow several, science educators on social media, and I learn new stuff all the time. So I'm like, I'm really happy about it. So yeah, I thought that would be something fun to play with, because it is, in our lives right now, it's something we're all familiar with, whether from one side or the other. So yeah, it was really cool to write about that.
Well, and I loved that you created a character in Adrian who is kind of reluctant to do that, even as it is, even though he's literally just perfect for all this, because first off, he's gorgeous. So who doesn't want a hot guy who's, oh no, he's dripping wet, that's terrible. Doing stuff in, usually, I'm assuming he's wearing some kind of, maybe a rash guard or something, but maybe he's topless. I'm not going to complain if he's topless. Messing with these sharks and all that, that's just perfect content. And he's using that. So of course there's people who are just watching it for the thirst factor, and there's no harm in that. But he's also doing good work in terms of educating and all these things. And I'll say, I'm old. So when I was young, we didn't have things like that. And the hands-on experience, you just didn't see it. So you were mentioning earlier, you're watching these documentaries and you don't really know what goes on. Most people don't, unless you have things like this that can even show, okay, they're doing like B-roll, and they probably won't show the whole thing because it is downtime, but you can show at least a little bit of it now, because it's not something where people have to, we're paying for this much time and the sponsors don't want downtime. Hey, we can just have a live feed, and maybe there's nothing. And I know I watch things like Monterey Bay Aquarium. This is just what's going on in the otter tank, and I'm just looking at otters for a while. Like I don't care if they're not doing it.
The otters are super adorable. I've come across a few of those, and my kids and I are like, oh, it's like a stuffed animal. I don't even.
Yeah. My daughter has 2 stuffed otters. One of them posed with your book, as you can see. She helped me stage some of those because she's the one who owns most of them. I can hear them coming again. They're going to come in like wild otters, the kittens.
Yeah, they
are. But they're just the most fun things to watch. And So like I said, when I was younger, I didn't have that, but I did have the experience. And I don't know if I told you this. I actually was on a Earthwatch expedition to Brazil for 2 weeks between my junior and senior year of high school. It is what determined that I should go to law school and not go and study zoology, because I talk so much that they're like, you are scaring the monkeys. You need to be quiet in the rainforest. This is
that sounds fabulous.
It was amazing, but I'm just going to echo that downtime, because we would leave our research station, which was like this little cabin, and drive off in this very unroad safe Jeep where I was sitting on the back of a plank and just holding on for dear life. And then we'd get off the Jeep and I would be handed a machete because the trails barely are there. So yes, they let a 17-year-old wander around with machete and just whack at things. And then we would just be sitting and waiting because we had, so you were talking about in the book, they were tagging these sharks and they were using different things to track them. We were tagging peccaries, which here they call them javelinas, but they're these giant pigs and they smell like olives. But they had only one tagged and they were tracking where their rotations were and what their patterns were, because in that area, one of the big things they're dealing with is habitat loss because of all of the farms that grow up in there. So you had these patches and then coffee plantations and then farmland. So it's like, where do these animals that were migrating frugivores, where did they go? And so I'm sitting there with something that looks like a ping pong paddle and a little box for hours, just trying to even get a signal and going, where the hell did the pig go? Like, that's literally what we're doing for hours. So I know the downtime, and I would much rather be, I don't know, sitting in a rainforest for an hour just waiting to get a signal. It's boring, but it's beautiful. I love it. But I'm sure that it's the same thing for these scientists sitting on a boat going, would really be nice to catch a shark. And like I said, I was there for 2 weeks. We caught one and it was super exciting. Although the type of injection they were supposed to use for the tranquilizer wasn't working, so that lead researcher had to switch to a blow dart. So I saw her using like an actual blow dart to knock out the pig, which was kind of weird. So we did that.
What I'm hearing is like you have a rainforest research book.
I do, because I write speculative. I have thought about writing one, but I've had to deal with certain things. Like, I am not someone from Brazil, so if I'm writing in that area, I've got to be really, really careful. So I thought about like, what can I do and maybe move it somewhere else so that I'm not dealing with a Brazilian culture that I don't have enough understanding with to deal with appropriately. I only know how to say a few things, including I was almost set up by a nice woman who was telling me that if I prayed to St. Anthony, I think, I would get a husband. I was 17 and not really interested in a husband at that point, but she was very concerned. And I think she had a son that she was trying to get rid of. I'm not entirely sure. But I do love how scientifically accurate you handled all this stuff. There was no sensationalism. There was no like, and then Adrian got eaten by the shark. So like, just for the record, like if anybody's reading this thinking it's the Meg, also I do admit, have you seen the one on Netflix where there are sharks under Paris?
No, I know there's all of the, I heard that there's like a shark avalanche. Apparently there's like a shark, obviously Sharknado.
Sharknado. But so I've seen both the Meg movies where it's giant shark and it's something that's under some layer. Ridiculous. But the one that was set in Paris was even more ridiculous because there are sharks and then there's going to be like the Olympics swimming through and then the sharks and the Olympians and it's kind of ridiculous. But your book never went there. And so I totally love that it's like, no, this is what they're doing. They're trying to actually get research done and make that balance between letting people know, because of that whole outreach thing and that whole idea of education as an outreach that leads back into conservation, because what people don't know about, they don't care about, and then there's no funding. And Hope found that out the fun way at a meeting that she didn't expect to have to talk to.
Yeah. Hope has that whole side. She has, you'll see, as people will see in the book, that she has a very good reason to not being a fan of cameras and sort of being on the spot. Which I feel like Adrian that's a moment for us to see how much he does care about her and how much he's willing to take care of her once he figures out what she needs in that case. But yeah, I feel like I said, I've always roped my family into watching these documentaries, and I'm like, this is important, this is something you could care about. And so I'm always the one that's like spitting out, random shark facts, even though I know a tiny fraction of, you know, what anyone who's
But what
actually in
you
the
know
field
you want to share, and I
yeah,
appreciate
but I'm
that.
like, you know, there's really, and my friends will be like, yeah, sharks, cool. And I'm like, no, but it really is. Because I feel like that's the lesser side. You know, you always see sort of dire things, but I'm like, no, the things that I see because I'm caring about are so many more fascinating things that are out there beyond just you know, these news stories that you can hear. So I'm like, it's there. If you go looking for it, the content is there, and there's so many ways to learn. So that's what I was sort of hoping, is that people will read it and sort of be inspired to go, you know, watch a documentary or go, you know, look up sharks, because that's how I am when I read a book about something that I don't know about. I'm like, oh, let me go dive down, you know, the rabbit hole
Yes.
of Google and
I was
find
gonna say
out more.
rabbit hole opened, exactly. And now it's a
Yeah,
shark hole. So I mean,
yeah.
you've got that going. And I was laughing with some of the stuff because I realized very belatedly that a very silly YouTuber or maybe just Instagrammer or TikToker that I do enjoy watching actually is doing conservation work. So I don't know if you've seen this guy who walks through the Everglades and he just yoinks a bunch of animals. Like he's walking through swamps at night barefoot. And you just see all the mosquitoes on his leg. I'm like, what is wrong with you? And I thought he was just being ridiculous, but he's removing invasive species. So he's going through and he's talking to all these animals. He's like, hey, I'm looking for that 20-footer. Where's that Burmese python? Because you know where Burmese pythons belong? Burma,
Yeah, I
not
heard
in the
that
Florida Everglades. So he's
people have let
removing
them loose.
exactly.
Yeah.
So he's going through and he's removing them, but it's so funny because he's just picking up every animal and it doesn't matter. It's like, oh, it's giving me a little kiss and there's like a snake hanging off his arm. And I'm thinking this guy must have every kind of antivenom or on him, or he's just immune at this point because he gets bitten like once an episode.
Oh my
And
goodness.
there are 37 episodes, but he'll just have like a handful of geckos. I'm like, that's not right. But I realized some of these things are things that don't belong there. And so he's removing them. Just as a couple years ago, my girls' scout troop, we were on the beach doing an invasive species removal. We were removing like an ice plant. I'm like, this is the worst job ever. Because we're sitting there with these like little tiny shovels removing this ice plant that doesn't belong there. And so they're like, if it looks like this, it's got to go. So we're all just ripping out this plant because here in California, we have a lot of invasive species and there's a lot of work being done trying to bring back things that are native species that are threatened. And so they'll have just volunteer groups going, dig out that plant, doesn't belong there. Get
It's
it
so
out.
awesome that you were able to participate in that. I love that. And the kids too, because I feel like that's where it starts, right? They see that you're doing this and now, and that's something that you're actually going out and, you know, a big positive step that you're taking. So yeah, Hope would be proud.
Hope would be proud of me, probably more so than the guy who's just like yoinking snakes by the handful. Because I'm not taking my children to go do that. Like snakes are great. My eldest daughter's best friend has a pet snake named Firecracker. I've gotten to hold him. He's very sweet. But you don't just yoink snakes in real life. Like that's just probably not a thing we want to encourage children to do. Like put that down. But same with sharks, although generally you're not going to run into sharks when you're just hiking like we have with snakes. And the fact that we've got which kind of sharks, so that's one of the other things is I feel like media just talks about everything's a great white shark, there are no other sharks. Like,
yeah, they
so
get a lot of people,
sharks.
and I think they're super cool. And Hope does too, as you'll see in the book. That's like, you know, the shark that first got her into it and everything. But yeah, there's so many more. Like I've seen, you know, shows about like these lesser known sharks, and I'm like, they're amazing. There's so many species of shark. There are sharks that can like walk on coral when the tide goes out on their little fins. Yeah, so that I'm like, I think they're called epaulet sharks. I might be wrong.
No idea, but I'm going to take your word for it because you're the shark.
Super cute and small, you know, and so they come in all shapes and sizes. And they don't just eat fish; they eat all sorts of things. So like, there's so much. I mean, yeah, the book just barely scrapes the surface of, you know, anything that you could learn about sharks. But again, I just feel like in romance there is that spot where we can see what people are passionate about, what the characters are passionate about, and then that can be really inspiring. You know, whether it's baking or whether it's, you know, being a car mechanic, if someone loves what they do and you can communicate that on the page, then it can like make you want to go out and learn about it. And I just think that's a cool opportunity to sort of share something that I was passionate about and bring it to the characters.
Well, and I love that you did that because one of the things, so this is not a science tech book, so they're like the facts feel accurate, but if you're looking for a really comprehensive guide on sharks, this is probably not the book you want, but it's a good guide to romance and even to, I feel like one of the things I saw in here that you handled so well is the idea that even when two people are alike and they have similar passions and even similar careers, it doesn't mean everything's going to be easy. And it doesn't mean everything's just going to work out like, oh, it's perfect. Like I remember years ago when I was still working as an attorney, and we don't talk about this. One of my coworkers, like I had a very awkward, funny encounter where I was at like a 3-day long depo and mediation session, and I was sitting with the same people, and I swore this guy who was around my age was flirting with me. Okay, so this is after I'm divorced and before I've met my now husband. I don't want to say current because it makes him sound temporary, but my husband, right? And like 3 days long, I thought he was flirting, and then the 4th day, he's like, "Do you think I could get the court reporter's number? She's really cute." And I'm just like, what? And then when I go back to my office and I tell one of my friends this, and he's like, no, attorneys should never, ever date other attorneys. That's just like the worst combo. So you dodged a bullet there because you don't want to date, like, you need somebody completely different. And my husband's a teacher. So that was good. Like, no 2 attorney household here. And I know it works for some people, but just even the idea that, oh, they should have so much in common. They can talk sharks and not bore each other. But like the locations of where you're going to school, where are the studies happening? Like where's the money coming from? Because it isn't a field where you just go and get an office job. There's no shark office job really. Like you have to go where
like in conservation and sort of things related. But I think, yeah, they both like, well, he in particular loves teaching, so there's a teaching element of being a professor. Are you going to be in the classroom? Are you going to be running studies? Yeah, there's so many different things. And Hope is sort of, she loves everything. She sort of just doesn't like to settle down, sort of. So it's perfect for her. Not necessarily perfect for having, a long-term, steady, typical relationship that you would see. And that's sort of another thing that I had fun was like sort of playing off of, a relationship the happily ever after being together is what is key, not necessarily what that looks like, the traditional, you're living under the same roof or, you're married at the end of the book. There's lots of ways where them together as a couple can look, and they are together, they are making that commitment, but it's not necessarily what works for, one person may not work for another. So they have to find something that allows them to have this passion and have the career and also love each other long term. And I think that's what I was searching for them to find in the book.
Well, I think you handled it really beautifully because I feel like it could have been one of those things where it's like, okay, and then one of them decides, oh, their whole ideas about how they want their life to be is wrong. Now, I know Hope and Adrian both re-examine some things and come to some better understandings of what they think. Like one of the things I thought was really funny because I think I grew up in many ways in the same household that Hope did, where it's like these 2 parents who were like fell in love and got married young and everything's great. But she looked at it as like, they gave up all the things they wanted to do for this. How stupid are they? And it's like, dude, they're happy. And she's like, but are they though? It's like, no, you know they were happy. And my parents, my mom passed away just before my eldest was born. But up until then, like they had a just storybook marriage, and I'm probably exaggerating because I wasn't in that marriage, but they had the kind of marriage you'd think people would want. And it's so funny because Hope's looking at it going, do I really want to do that? That seems really constricting. And so you get it where she comes from that. And then Adrian's background, still 2 loving parents, but they moved so much that he's like, hi, I'm the new guy. Hi, I'm still the new guy. Hi, I'm the new guy again. And that he doesn't necessarily want that for his life growing up. So they both come from real reasons why they would want the things that they want. And neither one of them is wrong. Neither one of them is like, oh, you're coming from this at a bad way or you're stupid. But they both have to kind of think about, what is it I want for me and what does that look like and how much of my own preconceptions are holding me back rather than me being able to in the moment analyze, what do I want now, what's making me happy and what isn't making me happy. And it may not be what I thought it would be, but you were earlier saying something about like how in the moment you want the book to be, that it stands the test of time, and that you bring in these modern things like, you know what? People can text, people can call, people can FaceTime. It's not like the olden days where I remember the college boyfriend I had, I was at school and he was a couple hours away. And I remember having to like get time in the computer lab to text. Like, remember when that was when like the computer you had in your room, it doesn't connect to the internet. I know people watching now are like, what, how old are you? I'm 100. And that's what it was like. So like actually mailing letters and having to wait days to hear from somebody and then waiting for the call to get cheaper after 7 p.m. to talk to them, or 8 p.m. or whenever minutes got cheaper, because that was like a way things were. We have all these ways to communicate now. So even if it might be better if you guys could share a bed every night, then that's okay too if that's not what works out. Like for them to figure out what works for them and their lives and still having each other in it. I love how you like worked all those things out, but it never felt like, oh, this is too tidy. That would never happen.
Yeah, and I think that was part of it, is that they had successfully had sort of a long distance relationship for most of their relationship. And I think there was a sort of societal pressure that this is what a relationship should look like, even if you have been successfully doing it another way. And she, again, like you said, Hope, she came from this loving 2-parent household. She's, the only kid. So she's received all this love and affection, but in her mind, that was like it for her parents. Like, they had sort of, they didn't have all careers, right? And so in her mind, career was always such a big thing, but for her parents, that's not what they wanted. They just wanted a job that paid the bills, gave them time to hang out with family, friends and family, and that's what they wanted. And so she couldn't understand that not everyone wants what she wants. It was sort of just this tunnel vision of, I want this big career. I want to be making a difference, and making a difference, whatever that means, because her parents were making a difference in, how they raised her. They gave her all these opportunities. And so she has to sort of come to this realization that, hey, just as I don't want someone to tell me how I'm going to live my life and what's going to make me happy, I can't be putting that onto other people. And so, yeah, I think that was a big thing for her, is that she had to realize, like, this big life of hers, it can look different. Someone's big life doesn't have to mean, going out and inventing, something new, or solving a problem, in shark conservation.
I fixed the entire planet. Otherwise, exactly. I cannot rest.
And she has that view because of her amazing parents, right? They told her, oh, you can do everything, you can do whatever you set your mind to. But yeah, what she took out of it is like, hey, a relationship is a distraction. And then she kind of realizes, hey, maybe a relationship can be an add-on, a benefit, not a taking away from. So yeah.
And when you do have kind of an unconventional job, things will look different. And I will say one of the things that I did not expect. So when I went down to Brazil, I was told who my leader would be. I didn't know her spouse was going to be leading a parallel expedition. So I signed on for peccaries, and half the time I actually was in the small little tributaries of the Amazon, and they were the saltwater areas because they came from some of the areas that came up from the Atlantic, and we were doing fish surveys. So I was catching fish by the bucketfuls, and I was naming all of them. They're like, Allison, you do not have to name all of them. I'm like, I'm going to give them all gender neutral names because I don't know what gender they are, and I'm going to go through all of them, and we're naming them. They're like 300 here. I'm like, I will do it. This is another reason they're like, you are probably not cut out for biology.
Like, I was gonna say, this could be a whole new. I'm super interested in this. I need to hear more.
It was honestly so fun, and it was one of those life-changing times where I'm like, I love this, and I would love to do this again. But I also knew it wasn't going to be the kind of lifestyle I wanted, because I'm like, what are the odds I'm going to fall in love with somebody who also wants to go study someplace there and doesn't mind that I'm talking so much that all the capuchins are throwing fruit at us because they're like, you need to shut up now. That and the fact that like on these long hikes that were often up and down hills, I would sing or whistle, and they're like, you can't do that either. I'm like, it's the only way to make it go faster. Okay. Because my legs really hurt right now. But like, they had a son.
Lovers, grumpy sunshine.
Yes. Grumpy. I was definitely the sunshine that made everybody else grumpy. But they had a small son. And so the people who were the caretakers of the reserve area, they would watch the kid while they would be out during the day and then come back, and we'd all cook dinner and stuff and, do all this stuff in the evening and then start again. And they had groups coming through every 2 weeks. So they were isolated, but they also weren't isolated from society because there were new people bringing in new stuff every week. And I was there for 2 weeks, as were a couple other people, but we also had students coming in from the University of Brazil. And that was real fun because I was the idiot who signed up for a trip to Brazil speaking Spanish. They don't speak Spanish in Brazil. They speak Portuguese. And so there were a couple times where I was left alone with a Spanish-speaking student from Brazil, where Spanish was their second language. It was my second language. So we were talking to each other like toddlers because they didn't speak English and I didn't speak Portuguese. And we're like using 2- and 3-word sentences trying to figure out like how much longer until the Jeep came back for us, or if we should just give up and walk because we were quite far out. Yeah. But yeah, like those were some of the things, because I saw their relationship and I thought, that's great, but I don't know if that's for me. And so I was glad I got to do it. And also there's a lot of math. I can't do the math.
Yeah, That's me. That's when I'm like, people are like, oh, you have a science background? I'm like, absolutely not. Because math is not my friend, you know. It's just
Like, if
not
it
at
was
all.
just taxonomy, I'm like, I will name all your animals. But they're like, no, you actually have to do things like be able to figure out body weight to be able to immediately know how much of the tranquilizer to give. I'm like, nope, you made me math. Can't do it. Not gonna be able to hang in here
Yeah,
with that.
the units of measurement, I'm
Mhm.
always things like that. I'm like, no, yeah, I'll leave the science to the scientists.
Exactly. You're like, I'll just talk about them falling in love. So
Yes.
there are so many times. I mean, this doesn't happen for me with every book, and it certainly doesn't happen with a lot of romances because I am not like a Hallmark Channel kind of girl. I need this to be a movie, and I'm going to need you to cast the movie a while. I couldn't think of anybody for either of the roles, partially because I'll admit I just kept picturing you as Hope, and I'm like, Chandra's not Hope. This is a different character. She doesn't even look like her on the front, but I'm just like, but I also finished Umbrella Academy, and I'm like, well, so now Emmy Raver Lappin is done, so maybe she could play Hope because the show's over. So she's got time.
Yeah. See, and I'm that person. I am not good with faces. So I am, whenever people ask me to fan cast, I'm like, I don't know. That's why I'm not in Hollywood. But yes, you can cast and then you can send out and petition and then
Yes,
make it.
I will be spearheading that, and including because, so one of the things, and you never directly like said, so this is unusual because, but there was a couple times where it'd say like seeing somebody like me. So the idea that you have two Black marine biologists working together on camera. I went to SeaWorld this summer. I don't necessarily recommend it for a few reasons because the rides kept breaking down, and there's mostly rides and not a lot of fish anymore. So that changed. I'm like, what happened to all the fish? But I saw there was a Black male marine biologist who was working with all the I want to say they were the pilot whales, so they were in the dolphin show. And that is the first time I've ever seen somebody who was not white and not a blonde. Like they're pretty much only blonde girls I think are allowed to work there, and it was mostly women, but it was one guy, and I'm like, I love this. And they never made a big deal of it. They weren't like, and here somebody from a different background who was, and I love that because Adrian was like, someone like me, that's probably not super represented, that there are not probably a lot of Black male marine biologists out there working right now. Was that something that you like intentionally wanted to include, or you're just like, you know what, I want them to be this and I'm writing these characters, so that's what they are?
I wanted to include it because it is the reality. It's just not shown, like you said.
Yeah.
On documentaries, it's starting to change. I don't know if you watched any of the Nat Geo shows. There was some Black marine biologists on there this year.
Yeah, they ask, and they want to be in your show. Like, pass them over.
Yeah, people of all races and genders are in marine biology, and also women. Again, it's not something that we've seen portrayed in the media a lot. You often see, the men who are shark scientists coming in for the interviews, but there are tons of female marine biologists. So it's just a reality. And so that's why I didn't sort of want to make a big point of saying it because, of course, there are different experiences for everyone, but I'm like, I just want this to reflect the reality and not be sort of something that they feel like they're having to prove themselves or having to say, hey, I'm the first to do X, Y, Z, because this is just, these people are doing their jobs. They're out there in the world in shark science. I follow, several Black marine biologists who are women. So it's just a thing. It happens, and we just don't see it. We just haven't seen it.
And so I like that you made it as like, it's just happening. And here, I'm going to show you again so that it becomes more part of just the landscape. It's like, oh, it's not like these are the first they're doing. No, they might be the first who have their own really cool YouTube channel and maybe a drink named after them at a local bar. But that's just because, again, thirst trap, when the guy's that good looking, what are you going to do? People are going to want to drink.
And one of the most famous shark scientists that I hadn't heard about until recently, but again, I'm not in the field. She's someone that is super huge in the field, is Dr. Eugenie Clark.
Yes, you mentioned her.
Yeah, she was a biracial Japanese American shark scientist, ichthyologist, like all sorts of fishes.
All fish.
Yes. Back in the day, she recently passed away. But I mean, so I believe she was born in, I'm going to get this wrong because again, numbers, but like the 30s or something, so it's not a new thing to have women and marginalized races like be in the marine biologist. So yeah, that's just something that, like I said, I wanted to write Hope because I usually do my my female protagonists are my race and gender. And so then for Adrian, I was like, yeah, he's gonna be a Black marine biologist. It's a thing that happens. And he is out there to be, I feel like the awesome thing about social media and about documentaries and things is like, if ever a kid can see someone on there that looks like them, you know, a kid with locks, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a guy doing what I do. It just lets people see the possibilities that were there, but maybe they didn't see. And so that's something that I think is a reason why Adrian decided partially to embrace this idea, which he was not really a fan of going on social media, but he was like, you know, I can make a change in lots of ways, and that's one way that could make a difference. So that's a little bit where it comes into play for them.
Well, yeah, and being able to see like, hey, I'm not limited by anything. I'm limited by what I want to do, and that's it. And not like, oh, well, people like me don't do that. It's like, no, there's no people like you. There's people, and what are your interests? What are your passions? And follow those passions, and being able to see, hey, there's a history here. You aren't necessarily having to do something that's unheard of, or people are going to look and go like, really, you want to do this new thing? But I still, there are people I'm following who are, it's like, oh, I'm the first in my family to go to college to do this, or I'm the first one to get a graduate degree. I'm the first to get to go to space. Like, there's one social media woman I follow who, it's like, she's always wearing space stuff, and they're like, do you have to like shove it in our face? And she's like dancing in the stars. She's like, of course I'm going to wear this. I'm an astronaut. And I just thought it was amazing. Like, I'm not an astronaut. I could not handle that. I would throw up immediately. But if I were an astronaut, I would absolutely be wearing stars all the time and making sure everybody knew that I'm an astronaut, because that's just amazingly cool. So again, she's also doing it to show girls can be astronauts. This is something, it's not just a men's club. And my husband is of the opinion that honestly only women should be astronauts. But he's like, they get along better in confined spaces. They're less likely to snap. And that's mostly because he's seen too many like space horror where someone ends up being a serial killer. And it's never the woman. It's usually some crazy dude. So I do understand where he's coming from. But again, fiction's probably kind of hit him a little bit. So we'll work on getting this fan cast and then legit cast later, possibly borrowing some of the real scientists, because then you don't have to teach them anything. They just have to learn their lines. They can already handle. Yes, they can already do that. But you are also working on, you told me now that your kids are back in school. You are writing more than one book right now. So what are you working on right now?
So I have a book that will be out next summer. We don't have a pub date yet, but another book, a standalone, coming with Canary Street, which can't say much because we haven't announced it yet, but I will say it is the most rom-com-ish book of all of my books that I've written. It's with my editor right now. But yeah, I had so much fun. There's like hijinks ensue.
Nice. I took all the tropes and they all went into it.
Yeah, I did like no research because I was burned out a little bit on that.
I don't blame you.
It was really fun to research for Second Tide. I was like, let me pick something that, you know, I don't have to do interlibrary loan to write about.
I saw you. Thank you for interlibrary loan, so I can get all these books and do that. So
it was my best friend, but then I made the mistake of Googling a book because I really loved it. It was this big book about all these different shark species and illustrated like encyclopedia sort of book. And I was like, oh, I would love to have this. It's sort of like to just look at all the time. And I looked it up, it was like $300 or something. I was like, oh, I can't spill anything on this.
That's probably not one I'm going to be able to keep. I'm going to return that one. Sorry.
Yeah. So I've got a fun rom-com coming out, and hopefully we'll be announcing more soon. I've gotten to see some drafts of the cover now. I'm so excited. But then I also have the Orchard Harbor series is coming out with special edition, and I'm going to be doing a small town romance series that is again set on the shores of Lake Michigan. So if you read Second Tide's The Charm and you liked Lake Michigan but didn't get enough, the Orchard Harbor series. And so it's going to follow three best friends as they sort of navigate life and love in this small town on the shores of Lake Michigan. There's like wineries, there's of course the coastal vibes. So I'm working on book one in that series right now.
Very nice. So you're still working on that. So we don't have a release date for that one yet. So, well, I'm gonna be wishing you well and wishing you good transition between books, because we were talking just before we went live about how it is when you're going back and forth between books and how confusing that can be, changing points of view, changing the voice to make sure the voice gets right. I know I generally don't like hopping between books because my brain gets just jello when I do that. But when I do, the nice thing is I put on different hats because I'm a science fiction, speculative fiction author, and that's a very different voice and style for me than it is when I write my rom-coms, which is just ridiculousness. And there is never any reason research involved other than what's on the menu at a Lebanese restaurant, because I want to make sure I have as many items of food thrown in the scene for no reason at all other than it amuses me. So doing that, sometimes it's a little bit easier, but I did make the mistake. So this had 2 points of view. And you know, it's the dual narrative boy and girl. My last rom-com had 5 because I'm an idiot and have no chill, and having to go back, but it was 5 women and going through their stories as they do it and trying to make sure all their voices are distinctive. That's a hard thing to do. So I totally hear you on going back and forth and like, what tense am I in? What point of view am I in? What town am I in? Like, yes. Like you have them doing stuff like, wait a second, we are in Orchard Harbor. This can't happen here. Hold on, wrong area. They won't have this kind of fish. Move on, get all that there. So, I mean, it does make me feel
these. I can't. I salute you because I don't know. I mean, I don't think
recommend it. I don't know if it was a good idea. I mean, by the time I was done, I'm like, this is just a Shakespearean farce. It's not. I'm not sure it qualifies as a rom-com, but I mean, there was romance in it. But it was the series ender from my books, and so it was all the points of view from the earlier books plus 2 more, and doing that. And then I'm going to have a novella coming out for Christmas because I have to do you have to do a Christmas novella at some point. Have you ever considered doing a Christmas novella? Sharks wearing little Santa caps?
Right, it would be fun. I have thought about doing different scenes from my books, sort of like a little short story. I don't know about a novella, but a short story with like catching up with the characters from my books.
That would be very fun because I can see all that stuff at Christmas. And honestly, I kind of want to do the barbecue restaurant at Christmas just because I can see them going all out with the food. And I mean, there was food in Second Time's the Charm, but I don't think you can outdo the bakery and the barbecue in the first 2. So I'm hoping with your small town romance, there will be, you said wineries. So
there will be, there'll be food involved. Yeah. The first book, just a little spoiler is that the female protagonist works with food. So yes, I am already throwing in the
foodies who write, you are my people. Yes.
Yeah, it's really hard not to. That's why I sort of popped up a little bit in Second Time's the Charm because I'm like, I love to eat, I love to cook. So it's going to show up regardless. But yeah.
Well, and I love how you handle that, even with just like, wait a second, when we were together, you're eating like peanut butter out of the fridge, and now he's over there making what have you done with my boyfriend? Like, you're completely different now and upgraded. I do like this model, including, you know, the fact that his way of coping with his loss of her was working out. So it's like, so I see you are a little different now, as he's like flexing and she's just staring.
Which is like, that's something I wanted to be careful with because I very believe in, you know, body positivity. So I wanted to make sure that she loved him before how he was. Yes. And she loves him now. And so we have moments where she's like, I love it either way, but like, you know, the internet loves. They love
like this. The thirst viewers who are like, yes. So show me more of these sharks. Can you take off your shirt while we show these sharks? No, you can't. That's inappropriate. All right, we won't do that. But if you get wet, that's okay too. but I do remember because Digging Up Love, the main character, she liked to weightlift, and so you were kind of doing like, hey, you know what? Weightlifting is also something women like to do, and I will try not to kick the kettlebell here below me, but it's something I'm trying to do to make sure that I don't have bone loss as I get older because you gotta do that, and things like building muscle it's not just good for your body overall, but it's good for your brain and it's good for all that stuff. So body positivity and making it not just so that he's handsomer. He did that with the beard. That's what he
no, but yeah, the lifting weights is great for procrastination as well.
Oh yes, you're like, sorry, I can't do that right now. I'm gonna go do this instead.
Busy. I can't, you know, put in my word count for the day. I gotta lift some weights.
Gotta lift some weights out.
But it does actually get the juices flowing. I feel like going on a walk, lifting weights. Even though I'm always like, no, it won't make a difference. And then I'm like, oh darn it, actually it did. You know, it did unlock something.
Sometimes it's those things where when your brain is, like your body's doing something, your brain just starts going. And I know for me, the 2 places I get ideas where I'm like, I can't do anything about it is when I'm in the shower. And when I'm like going on a walk or a drive, where it's like my body is doing something, but my brain is just kind of at ends and it goes, I got to do something. And then it comes up with something and I'll be like, I'm driving right now. I can't do anything about it. So I'm using voice to type and hoping no cop pulls me over as I'm making a bad note. And then I read it later. I'm like, well, this is not English. So, and it's not even Spanish either. I mean, because then I could maybe try something, but no, just gibberish, all messed up
They even
words.
have those notepads that can hang up in the shower with like a pencil. Yeah. Yeah, like it's like squeegees onto the like it's like a waterproof paper.
Okay, I'm
So
gonna need that.
your solution.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that they had that. I just sit there repeating it to myself. Like I will have like points where for me, I don't necessarily get writer's block, but I'll get scene block where I don't know how to get out of a scene, and I'll figure out the transition scene while I'm in there, and I'll just be like washing my hair and repeating it to myself. This is what happens. This is what happens. This is what happens. And I'm,
Yes.
where the cats are like, what is wrong with her?
Well, see, maybe that would help. Then you wouldn't have to do the, because that's how I am. I'm like, I'm going to remember it. I'm definitely going to remember it. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, no, I don't remember it.
I don't remember it. No. And my husband gets on me. He's like, don't yell across the house. I'm like, you do realize that if I need to tell you something and I have to walk all the way across the house, our house is not that big. I will have forgotten because I would have stepped on a cat, had to get interrupted by a child, have to go stop and refill somebody's water cup or something. By the time I get to him, I have no idea what I was going to say. Like, none at all. Like my brain just wandered off there. So good luck doing that. Even if I'm ending up doing the soap. Was that a story you read as a kid? It was in my mom had a collection of stuff, and it was a story about a kid who's trying to remember he's got to go to the store and get soap. And so he says soap. And he says it over and over again, but things keep happening. He keeps getting hurt and knocked over and all sorts of stuff happens. And he keeps repeating then the last thing he said and just angering everybody else about. I'll have to find a copy of this story, but it was one of my favorites as a kid. So I'm definitely the kid from soap.
So
that by the time I get back there, I'm like, I don't know why I've got a can of cat food in my head, but I don't think this is what I was trying to talk to you about. Chandra, it was amazing talking to you. We're like almost an hour now, so I'm going to have to let you go. Folks, this is out. Go find it in paperback. Is it an audio too? Because I think it's
an audio, and it's available even on Spotify,
nice.
but like Libra FM, yep, Hoopla. Yeah.
I don't know what that is. What's Hoopla?
Oh, Hoopla. So it's the, do you know Libby, the library app? Yeah. So it's like Libby, but Hoopla, it doesn't have hold times. So if your library has the copies, you just can check it out without any hold or any wait.
But is that linked to certain libraries? Because I do Cloud Library, and mine does require me to like wait my turn if the copy isn't available.
So I'm not sure. I thought it was all libraries. I use both Libby and Hoopla because I know they're different sort of apps. But yeah, I'm not sure if I thought it was all libraries. But I do know, libraries have a choice over which books they can choose for the digital. But yeah,
I'm gonna find it.
Yeah, you should check out the book. It's nice because then if it's a popular book, you can just get it right away still. But they have a different title. So mine is on Hoopla for the audiobook.
Well, I love it. I would highly recommend this as an audio too. I bet the narrator's is it dual narrator?
It is, yes. And they're actually the same two narrators who did my previous 2 books, which was really cool. Yeah. And I haven't listened to the whole thing because it can be hard for me to listen to my own audiobook. I don't know about you, just to hear my words. But I know from listening to the other ones and from people's reactions that they did a fantastic job. They do an awesome job.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, folks, go out and get or listen, however you're preferred. I usually listen, but yours actually have physical copies. So I'm like, you're one of the few authors I've only eyeball read. And that's kind of amazing because I usually am like, is there audio? Please, can I get audio? But I think because it is rom-com, they are books that, they're not like chonkers that are like this that take me 4 years to get through. So I can get through it in, a week and enjoy it as my pleasure reading. So thank you, Chandra. I appreciate you coming on here. Folks, we will be back with Vox Vomitus. I want to say next Tuesday instead of Wednesday with Liz Holden and her Mighty Millie Novak. I don't know why that's hard to say, but it is Mighty Millie Novak, which is a YA queer roller derby book. And I'm not making any of that up. I really am going to go join roller derby now. So if I end up with some broken arms, you guys know why. Thank you, Chandra,
so much for having me.
If you're seeing this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel so you can get more author interviews on both Vox Vomitus and To the Moon Allison. See you next time.